So welcome everybody. Maybe you want to chat in just a few words about how you are. Yeah, just nice to see a few words. Yeah, what's on your mind or how you are, what comes up with this theme topic. Yeah. Okay, there we go. Gratefulness. That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Great. Mhm. 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 Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you all. Yeah. So there's fires up in, Humboldt County and Oregon, and the smoke came, where I am in the Bay Area, came drifting down. Some of you are probably here too. Came is sort of like covering a lot of California. And this is like causes and conditions. Of course, it actually hasn't been a terrible fire season so far, but it was like, the whole kind of region sort of just coated in air that's like, you really can taste it kind of. And it's just like, oh yeah, causes and conditions and the beauty and blessings of interconnection, and then also the vulnerability of just being tied together in some ways. And whenever that happens, there's like, it's almost like the smoke is sort of like is real, but then it's like a metaphor in my mind, kind of, where it's just like, oh, just that kind of sense of, of being, yeah, just something, a certain species of pain arising in the mind. And some of that pain is probably an important signal, an important signal. And some of it is what the Buddhist tradition would call adventitious, like extra, and not so useful. But there is almost like a first arrow of that. And so just as a way of kind of checking in, that's sort of been in my field the last couple of days. And so yeah, but we're here to practice and to meet the conditions of our heart and mind as best we can. So very happy for that. And just as a kind of structure of the evening, will guide us in maybe half hour or so of sitting practice and um, offer. Maybe stretch for a moment, offer a talk, come back, have some questions and dialogue, and wrap at around 8:15 Pacific time. So okay, let's do this thing we do, and don't know what we're gonna get, but let's practice together. So finding your posture, maybe the your exhalation can be a kind of ripple of relaxation, soothing, whatever needs to be soothed. Maybe you're at peace, or maybe you're making peace with something. Both equally valid modes of Dharma practice. Can we get happy enough? Maybe not as happy as we want, but happy enough that we can just settle into our body, and somehow the imperfection of the moment feels more tolerable. So we're not trying to solve our problems, tie up the loose ends of a day or a life. sort of just an animal breathing, awake to our breath. With our breathing, there's vitaka and vichara, gently aiming the attention, and then essentially savoring the breath, soaking the attention into the sensations of your breathing. And when the attention gets pointed, the recognition, the acknowledgement, and when it soaks, savors the object, there's relaxation in our mind. The list of things we might worry about is endless. We are, after all, small creatures trying to leverage our thinking and worrying to keep us safe or prepare for pain. It's natural that our minds do this. There's no blame to place anywhere. Maybe even we say beautiful that our minds can do this. But if all we're ever doing is staying oriented to the threat of the future, the heart kind of sags. And so we practice feeling happy enough, safe enough, trusting that part of how we take care of our future is to be awake now, breathing in, breathing out. If there's anything persistently preoccupying, just see if we can breathe into that. Breathe into that pocket of intensity in our body, the feeling circuits of our body. And then perhaps the attention almost naturally drifts back to the breathing, interested, almost slightly refreshed by the foray into some other sense gate. There's the acknowledging, the soaking. This doesn't solve problems in a narrow sense, but our whole life looks different from the perspective of tranquility, stability. Okay, it's good to practice with you. Um, mm, yeah, maybe without sort of shaking off whatever was unfolding in you during the sit, maybe just take 3 minutes to, move or stretch your body, do whatever you like. Well, yeah, come on back in 3 and I'll give a talk. Okay. So, um, yeah, this theme of samadhi, the different flavors of samadhi, the its place within the broader Buddhist path. The word samadhi usually rendered as concentration, kind of the malleability of mind. It's been, that's been on my mind, and intersecting with these other themes that are highlighted in the write-up, and so it's kind of a mashup of different things that I talk about routinely, and see see what happens here. Um, Yeah, it's nice to sit with you. Sometimes when you sit and you're like, oh, I didn't know exactly, but I needed to sit, like really needed to, kind of feeling like, oh yeah, that's helpful. There's a reason we do this. So yeah, so samadhi, I'll just use that word rather than concentration, because that sometimes it's nice to have a word in a language that's um, often remote from us in some way, because the kind of richness and connotations of the word actually have to dawn on us as we grapple with it, rather than having some immediate association with a word like concentration. And so samadhi um, is about the limitations of our willfulness, and it's also about the power of our mind. I don't even know how many times I sat there, just trying to like make something happen, like relying on this sort of fantasy of the potency of my willfulness, for lack of a better word, that the concentration was like purely a function of me wanting to make something happen. But we know there are a lot of complexities about the ways that the movement of the heart that wants actually um, interrupts the nature of satisfaction. And so it's about the limitations of our willfulness, but it's also about the power of our mind, that there are, we have capacities that are often unrealized, that don't recognize, don't cultivate. And so samadhi is also very much about like, yeah, the potency of our mind. It is a teaching, as the entirety of the Dharma is, on conditionality. Something arises not out of nowhere, but because of other things, many other things. It's not something from nothing. Samadhi or anything arises out of causes and conditions. Samadhi arises out of many causes and conditions and is not something that in the kind of willful fantasy we just reach out and grab. It's something that grabs us, something that grabs us. And the Dharma is like that too. We're like reaching out to understand and to hold it, to like get our sea legs within the Dharma world. And it's like, okay, yeah, fair enough. But Dharma practice really begins when the path grabs us. And so as reflected in some of the language of the write-up, like I'm emphasizing some of the receptivity in Dharma practice, and in the cultivation of Samadhi. Ajahn Sujito said that the suttas describe Samadhi as something we enter into, not something we do. Right? It's very interesting to hear somebody who's studied Pali and the Pali, the suttas, the canon for many decades now is like, okay, the suttas really describe it as something we enter into rather than something we do. So just to situate it within this broader kind of mindfulness tradition, sati mindfulness, sati and samadhi are distinguished. They're distinguished in the sense that they're different factors on the Eightfold Path or the factors of enlightenment, awakening factors, that kind of thing. They're distinct enough not to be listed separately, right? Wise concentration, wise mindfulness, wise concentration. Okay, yeah, but deeply related, deeply related. And sometimes it's said that the difference is in the kind of aperture of attention, that mindfulness is broad and concentration is narrow. And I get where people are coming from in that, but it doesn't quite work because there are increasingly broad, we would say like broad flavors of samadhi, where the attentional aperture, I don't even know what an aperture is, but it's something with a camera and some, that kind of thing. But it's, the aperture of the attention gets really, really vast, really vast. Sound or space. There's a, absorption in infinite space. It's nothing but space, right? It's like, this is not a small aperture. This is like a very vast sense of samadhi. And so it doesn't really work to say mindfulness is broad, samadhi is narrow. Maybe a little bit better, and I don't know, but is that samadhi is a little bit more focused on the development of attention, and sati more focused around awareness. That's probably a controversial thing, and I think many traditions would pick a fight about that. But what I felt is like samadhi is this kind of there the sort of it's the brightening and brightening of the attentional spotlight, narrow or broad, as narrow as the tip of the nose, as broad as all of space or something. But it's this development of attention that is stabilizing and becoming brighter and brighter. And it's like the attentional spotlight is not leaking any light at all. The line between what is illuminated and what is in the dark is very stark. And samadhi involves the kind of this development, whereas mindfulness is is about attention, but it is also about a kind of background field of knowing, a background field of knowing that doesn't feel like it requires any attentional effort actually to sustain. And so we'll maybe say some more about this, but um, samadhi uh, is sometimes characterized as being as distinct from insight insofar as we don't learn. The claim is we don't learn in deep concentration because we're in such a state of seclusion that there's not the kind of mechanisms of learning, of actually generating and appreciating insight. The mind is secluded in such a way that it's not really operating. Those gears aren't really turning. It is in a state of real seclusion. And so it's said sometimes that samadhi is kind of, yeah, maybe this sort of, a little kind of dumb. It's like we're not learning on it. We're not learning on it. And I think I get that. I get that. I definitely um, have seen the experience of people practicing with their mind in a state of deep seclusion, and it has many beautiful effects, but it doesn't necessarily catalyze insight. So I get some of that, yeah. But that said, almost all insight emerges out of some species of samadhi. It's not necessarily the species that is like very secluded and where some of the mechanisms of learning are like suspended temporarily. There are different species of samadhi. So this is, this is Thanissaro Bhikkhu, actually, Metta Forest Monastery down there. Says many people tell us the Buddha taught two different types of meditation: mindfulness meditation, concentration meditation. Mindfulness meditation, they say, anytime Thanissaro Bhikkhu says, they say, you're coming in for some critique here, So, okay, mindfulness meditation, they say, is the direct path, while concentration practice is the scenic route that you take at your own risk because it's very easy to get caught there. You may never get out. But when you actually look at what the Buddha taught, he never separates these two practices. They are both parts of a single whole. Every time he explains mindfulness and its place on the path, he makes clear that the purpose of mindfulness is to lead the mind into a state of right concentration, to get the mind to settle down and find a place where it can feel really stable at home, where it can look at things steadily and see them for what they are. Tranquility and samadhi in the suttas do seem to be associated with truth seeing. That we do not perceive clearly the contention. We do not perceive clearly in a state of agitation. We misconstrue ourselves, we misconstrue others, we misconstrue the world. And that is an interesting kind of formulation. Like, do we get closer to truth when the attention is stable? Can just sort of inquire for yourself. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. It strikes me that we might perceive threats and opportunities more quickly when the attention is actually bouncing around, non-samadhi. Yeah, we might actually perceive threats and opportunities more clearly when there's a certain kind of measure of vigilance and the attention is pivoting from one sensory sphere to another. Pivot. pivot, pivot, Okay, maybe, but I do know that in our frenzied attention, we can't see peace as clearly. We can't see the Dharma, the teachings as clearly when we're fragmented. And in a way, we never want to take our eyes entirely off of peace. And so we have this formulation of samadhi, this kind of this settling, this gathering, this kind of, sometimes we liken it to like the stabilization of a telescope. If a telescope focused at the moon, if it were shaking, you would miss the grandeur of the moon. So we stabilize, stabilize. So I started by saying that samadhi is a kind of highlights the limits of our willfulness, and um, so it's maybe not traditionally linked exactly in this way, but I do link settling into some stillness, some silence with surrender. And that's not I don't even know what the Pali word is for that, but that just increasingly strikes me as just a kind of such a key part of our Dharma practice. And a key part of our Dharma practice because practice is a lot more about what we stop doing than what we start doing. And even just as we sit still, it's amazing how many things we're doing, amazing how many knobs we're trying to adjust, even just very subtly, amazing how much we might cease. And amazing, what it would mean to surrender. And we might have particular kind of associations with surrender, that word. That's definitely not a word, not not a word I might ever use, in my youth or something. But it was just associated with giving up power, or surrendering to someone or something that is unworthy, right? Yeah, we get kind of conditioned into like exerting our willfulness because we're often kind of forced to submit in some way to people or things or culture that is unworthy of us actually opening our heart to it. But in the Dharma practice, this kind of movement of the heart, this sort of surrender, letting go of willfulness, is quite central. And we're not exactly surrendering to the Buddha, but there are many aspects of our Dharma path that are obscured by our willfulness and obscured by our egocentric striving. It's like, and this is such a trap. This is why even the word samadhi, concentration, this stuff, jhana, meditative absorption, all of this is like so egoically titillating, because there's something about the kind of, the kind of centrality of willfulness in this realm. But we will not enter silence through engineering and manufacturing. We really actually are not giving up our power through surrender, but we are arriving at it. Arriving at it. The more deeply we actually surrender to the path, the more power we develop. And we got to be careful, right? Because, you know, we're entrusting our heart to something. And is it worthy of that? And that's a question we have to ask ourselves. This community or that teacher or that lineage or this tradition, okay, do I trust enough that it feels like, okay, I can let go? I can actually fully consent to the goodness and also the imperfection of the moment, to consent to the imperfection of, really everything, the kind of crack in everything, the imperfection of sight and sound and feeling and our capacities, all of it. And there's something about that gesture of like, yeah, I said, you either you're in peace or you're making peace. And that gesture of making peace with imperfection, you know, we got to do that like a million times. A million times. We just like let the kind of imperfection of the moment course through our tissues. And then we start to find our power. We start to find our power. And it's not that, this path is not about effort. Apparently, one scholar I heard said that effort is like among the most frequent themes in the suttas. When you look at all of them, survey, like, oh yeah, effort, quite central, right? And so what I'm saying is not contra, effort or something. Like, no, there's effort. Effort will need to be made. Effort will need to be made because, you know, neurosis is often the path of least resistance, you know? Meaning like my, sort of tease, like, my bad habits require precisely zero effort. Zero. It's just water rolling down a hill, an apple falling to the ground. It's like, this is these are the karmic grooves, right? These are the karmic grooves. And so this is going to require effort to work with, right? Deep growth is often not comfortable. It takes effort, takes energy. But we often misconstrue the kind of energy that's required. And it is often, not always, but often the energy of receptivity, of surrender, the kind of abandoning the framework where it's like, self versus samsara. And so willingness is not the same as willfulness. And this is especially important in the development of some stillness. So our effort is more characterized by willingness than willfulness. And all of the willfulness, sometimes it's so poignant just to like feel our human condition and feel just how much it seems we're tasked with managing. Just any life, even privileged lives, how much we're tasked with managing. There's like just small creature with, adaptive and ingenious in our own ways as the human species, but small creatures, amidst the vastness and amidst a kind of like, you know, a million threats and opportunities, a million things that have to go right in every moment to stay alive in our body. And so naturally we are tweaking things all the time, and that's reasonable, but it creates the impression that our mere kind of influence is actual control. And because we're sort of like compulsively optimizing, we sort of fail to open our heart to non-control, to helplessness. And I've often thought that dukkha and helplessness, those are kind of synonyms. Dukkha, usually rendered as suffering. There's an element of like a kind of connotation of dukkha for me that's like, oh yeah, there's a measure of helplessness. The tides of pleasure and pain and gain and loss are not strictly governable, may influence things, but just do not control anything. And so the Buddha says the world trembles in all directions. And some part of us wants to be exerting our power in every given moment, doing. And yet the Buddha said that one who achieves samadhi, one who lets go, achieves samadhi easily. Lets go. One way of thinking about letting go is it's kind of opening to the limitations of our control, opening to the limitations of our willfulness, but not actually hardening the heart in the context of it. Now, so much of the goodness of the path, I'm sort of making the case, requires measure of surrender, but to surrender, other pieces need to be in place, and we're doing something very kind of foreign to our system, and to surrender is to sort of lower ourselves down into not knowing. And you kind of don't do that unless we have some faith that goodness of some species will catch us. Goodness will catch us. That is a very, very persistent kind of fear as people start to get to the kind of precipice of some more silence, some more stillness, some insight, sense of like, okay, the kind of willfulness of the egoic processes are mobilized so strongly against that. And yet you kind of can't take the ego into that silence. You can't take that willfulness into the silence. And so we have to develop a certain kind of trust. And it's hard, especially the kind of first time of just like, oh, it's so still and silent or luminous or something. And then the kind of sense of like, is the air too thin to breathe here? And a kind of very, very, not universally, but very common kind of like the most congealed form of self and fear and all of this arises. And so we have to develop some faith that goodness will catch us. Goodness will catch us. Love and wisdom will catch you. The silence will catch you. And as we develop more faith in our path, faith really in our heart, faith in goodness itself, surrender feels more safe. And then falling doesn't feel threatening in the same way. The threshold of the known starts to feel more safe. It's okay. It's really okay not to know. It's really okay not to know. There's a lot of the kind of places we're going to in Dharma, we can't bring our knowing in the ordinary way, We just we can't bring all the familiar kind of models of self and world. We have to a certain kind of nomadic journey into the unknown. And then the kind of falling, the falling into some stillness, into some silence. That actually feels, we can consent to that. Samadhi might seem like a kind of a doing, but it's really more about surrendering to the momentum of our practice. Sometimes the conditions are simply not in place. The 2:30 meditation after lunch, the conditions are generally not in place for, deep stillness or something, right? We're sensitive to the context. The more interventionist we get, in a way, the more likely we are to chase away silence. And so we're acclimatizing to not knowing, to groundlessness, to, in a way, meaning making has a defensive quality to it, just like the whole realm of conceptualization has a kind of slightly defensive quality to it. I remember one time on retreat, it was at the end of a retreat, I think maybe half month retreat. And my remember his mind was quite open and was practicing like in the visual field, and just it was really just color form, like not bumping into anything, but that's about as functional as I was, I remember. And then like I sort of turned and focused on my friend's face, and like her face came into view, and in a way that that was sort of a congealed way of seeing, and it's sort of like a little bit of conceptual kind of activation. It was no longer just color and form. It was just my friend's face, But I remember there was a certain kind of grief, just in the congealing of the attention that way. And I don't know if that moment had exactly like a defensive quality to it, maybe more just the sense of warmth or something, but this like need to turn the world into objects and categorize and conceptualize and have names and places, threat and or opportunity. This has a kind of, this is actually, the Buddha said, is not strictly necessary. It's not strictly necessary that we freeze the world and conceptualize in exactly that way. But to step out of meaning, we do need to feel very safe, to step into some measure of groundlessness. Our inner and outer life needs to feel safe enough, right? And we see that so many of the movements of body and mind can be construed as kind of safety behaviors, you know? Safety behaviors, sort of like ritualistically checking in on the landscape of threat and opportunity, ritualistically checking in on our security. It's kind of like scanning the environment for confirmation, like that this moment is okay. This moment portends an okay next moment, right? There's a neuroscientist, her name is Kay Tai, and she said, fear has an authoritarian command over the rest of the brain. Fear has an authoritarian command over the rest of the brain. And that's powerful. That's powerful, you know? Thinking is usually described as a kind of cause of suffering, right? We train in wise view. We train in the wise view to, symptom of dukkha, symptom of suffering. Meaning that if there's peace and security, and I'll just say a few more things and then open it. If there's peace and security, we would not feel the kind of compulsion to conceptualize, freeze the world, right? But because we're naturally so preoccupied with our future and arranging our security, we differentiate and conceptualize and categorize. And it feels, as I alluded to in the sit, like we're always supposed to be worrying about something, always supposed to be kind of multitasking, right? There can be that feeling of, I don't, it's almost like the subtle kind of vulnerability and putting down one's worry and anxiety, like just putting it down. It has this, like, of course it's painful, but it has this soothing, self-soothing underbelly to it, where it feels like, okay, I'm doing my job to keep myself okay, right? And you put it down, right? You know those moments where the thoughts are like supercharged, right? And it feels like, wait, to put down that worry is like, that would be like reckless, you know. And then we try, and then it's like, and then it pulls us back in. It's like, oh, like, so it feels vulnerable in not actually having that as one of the premises in our world of thought, And so the sense of just like, oh yeah, things could always get more secure, more known, that really plagues us. We can't bring all of our knowing into silence. So a question I asked the Buddha, associated with what do appearances disappear? How do pleasure and pain disappear? Tell me this. I'm motivated to know how they disappear. And then the Buddha says, like, appearances disappear when not conceiving concepts, not conceiving false concepts, not non-conceiving, and not conceiving disappearance. This is because conceiving is the basis of conceptual differentiation. Conceiving is a kind of movement of the will, a kind of a subtle kind of contraction or clinging, that moment, that color and form became the face. And this, of course, is subtle, right? But when we get quiet, we see that the compulsion to freeze experience and to narrate, to keep adding to our autobiography is a kind of compulsion to control and stay secure. And there's a kind of terror of not talking to ourselves about our life compulsively, you know? And the more intense the feeling and affect is, the more aroused our body gets by something, anything, the more desperate we are to know and understand and conceptualize. And so the fear requires that we stay oriented all the time. And so we are trying to get safe enough, feel safe enough, feel like we cannot be ambushed by our inner life, feel like it's safe enough just to like settle in to a certain kind of defenselessness that is presence, you know? So, yeah, we, we can't bring our knowing into the silence. But then sometimes, you know, there's some perception of the silence, of the beautiful kind of wondrous dark. And then it's almost like, you know, I think Nietzsche said something similar, like the abyss looks back at you. Yeah. When the abyss looks back at you, there's fear, you know, and this is the kind of, yeah, often a kind of traditional unfolding in the face of silence, stillness. There's some kind of fear that that as the self kind of recoagulates, you know, and the sense of kind of like almost the defenselessness of stillness, of silence. And we just do our best to fold that that fear back into awareness, to trust, okay, yeah, love will catch me. Yeah. We developed the faith to know that we're not being dropped. We're not being dropped. Something will catch us. The Dharma will catch us. And then out of silence, we dwell in realms with less and less meaning, less and less meaning, less and less conceptual proliferation. But out of that silence, we come to make new meanings. Yeah, the experience changes us in different ways, or we notice things in new ways. And when our mind is more settled, we start to generate, I'm calling them meanings. We could say insights, stories, ways of understanding experience that are increasingly empowering, that lead to our welfare, lead to the welfare of others. We call it insight. Call it insight. And so, yeah, samadhi, faith, groundlessness. Um, offer this for your consideration. So, yeah, let's see. We have a bit of time for yeah, any questions or inquiries. Could be anything. You can maybe we'll start with any some people who want to put their voice into the room, but I'll keep my eyes on the chat too. Yeah, maybe Victoria, please.
Am I unmuted?
You are, yes.
Sorry, I'm a little bit in the dark. I'm in my pajamas.
That's the only way to do Zoom Dharma classes. I can't believe all these other people are in their clothes, It's like,
Well, I was oh, something's going on with the, looks like you're done. Okay, I don't know.
okay, I got you. Your sound is clear. Sound is
Okay,
clear.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, great, thanks. So I feel like you've been dancing around sadha. So I was wondering if you could get a little bit more into the weeds every now and then. I mean, I mean, I'm using the Pali word too, so to avoid sort of ambiguity. But how that fits into the scheme of samadhi and how because you've talked about trust and faith, and so I'd love to hear a little more of an exposition of how that all connects.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, usually sada usually rendered as faith, but sometimes as confidence, sometimes as trust, um, and is not is not renouncing all kind of critical discerning capacity, right? It's like we always need some, sort of say kind of, like we need something to keep us out of a cult, like out of something that we ought not surrender to, out of a system of ideas or people that actually do not have our best interest at heart, right? And so there's the maintenance of a certain kind of discernment and sensitivity. And as I've developed more faith and all of that, in a way, I'm more discerning. Right? But faith is a kind of celebrated, I think, because we the kind of mind that's like always kind of like dipping its toe in and then pulling it out and is never quite sure and can't quite surrender, and that is a very kind of halting way of practicing. And so I associate samadhi with a certain sense of heart I mean not samadhi, faith with relaxation. We're like develop enough confidence in the path that we're no longer actually trying to no longer assessing ourselves all the time. We're no longer worried about how we're doing. You know, we're just kind of like in. We're just in. And there's a way that things get a lot simpler when you hit a threshold where there's no turning back, kind of, you know. And people, our Dharma practice is sort of fragile in ways until we hit that kind of juncture where it's like, yeah, no turning back, you know. And in a certain way, like as a teacher, I sort of relax when I start to perceive like, okay, this person's in too deep to turn back, you know, like, and it's not that my job's done then, but it's like there's a certain relaxation in it for me, just in appreciating like, okay, this has actually been woven deeply enough into the kind of heart, mind, biology something where it's just like, okay, I'm going to keep going. And then the kind of melodrama of how I'm doing or how much progress I'm making, all the kind of egoic elaboration is just like, that just kind of fades a lot because it's like, well, you know, I don't have any other choices. I'm just going to keep going, you know? And so, in relation to samadhi specifically, there is something, and this is not a normal, this is not the normal typical formulation. This is just kind of my own hit on it, but it's like there's something about um, trusting that we will not be harmed in this realm of not knowing, in this realm of silence and stillness. Something like it's safe enough to like surrender to silence that I associate with faith, you know? And it's like we get to the threshold of the known where it's like you can just sense like, okay, I gotta like lay down a bunch of my ideas about what this is and what I want and who I am and da 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 da, you know, and then it's like, okay, what 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 what's gonna we have to have some trust that something's gonna catch us, right? So that very famous exchange from a yogi with I think Joseph Goldstein on a 3-month retreat many years ago, you know, and they said something like, "Well, the first realization is like I've jumped out of an airplane with no parachute, but the second realization is that there's no ground, you know." And it's like, oh, okay, no ground, no ground. Like I'm not like I'm this is not going to damage my heart, you know. I associate with faith. So that's where I was coming from. Does that speak to your question? Yeah.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I feel like that, although it's interesting, I feel you in the beginning when you're talking about, we have to have some element of discernment so we don't fall prey to cults or false beliefs. But by the same token, I feel like in a certain way, the surrender is almost the beginning. I mean, that's where the no turning back happens. I don't know. I mean, it's not
Mm-hmm.
really linear anyway, I guess.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Sure, sure. My pleasure. Uh, yeah, please.
Is that me?
Yeah, yeah, that's you. Yeah, yeah. Nice to see you. Yeah,
Nice
welcome.
to see you, Matthew. So grateful for your nuance and your potency. I hope this question makes enough sense. So, we talked about as we surrender more, there's an unknown, there's a knowingness. We said, if we're moving too quickly, if we're looking at the moon and the aperture is moving, we don't know. So we need enough stillness to know. And yet, as we surrender more, there is unknowingness.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like recently in my life, I've been just experiencing in the practical life unknowingness, what to do professionally about decisions, where to go physically in terms of where to live. And it's a little bit of an open-ended question, but kind of this, on the one hand, stabilization, so we know, we understand, we see things as they are, and then the unknowingness of surrender and how that combines with the unknowingness around decisions in the practical world. If you could address that in some way.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it is a dance of kind of of knowing and not knowing, of on the one hand, all this talk about not knowing, of like we're sort of like so um just so wedded to our kind of models of self and world, that it's actually like hard to learn deep lessons that are very different from the ones that we have learned, which is actually important. Like the Buddha said, like, people, you've learned the wrong thing. You've like learned the wrong lessons. You have made the wrong conclusions about the nature of samsara, and it's like, but now it's not easy to actually just, you don't check any of that at the door, right? So we come in with these like really kind of like very elaborate kind of, models of what, right? And so it's like, okay, not knowing. We need to surrender. We need to actually, I can feel the process in people. It's like just the kind of investment in certain ways of viewing, of perceiving, and it's like all of that has to be, um, you have to be willing to surrender all of it. Um, and so there's all this piece around not knowing. It's really a big topic. We could find it. We can approach it in a lot of different ways. But then the practice is about, mindfulness often described as knowing, a way of knowing, awareness, knowing, these kind of things. And so we are, I would say, by surrendering, and maybe this is too cute, but by surrendering into the unknowing, we learn new things, important things about ourselves and about what we want, and what our wants can actually even give us, right? Because that's important. It's like, what I would say is by like giving up some of the elaborate models of who we are and what we know and all this, like by surrendering to not knowing, we actually emerge out of that with important data points about what we really want, and what that can give us and what it cannot. And so this is not a path that like engenders like a lot of indecision or something like that. It's actually, we actually get very good at like sort of like sensing, like, just for me, it's like I've just learned to really attune to a kind of subtle yes or no, that I like have to listen to the depths of my being to hear, but that's been very wise counsel for me. But that's taken a lot of practice, I feel, to actually distill out the voices of sort of clinging of one kind or another that can masquerade as kind of wisdom or intuition or something like that, right? And so, but we become, I would say, essentially, we become better predictors of our own happiness. It's like we've been wrong a lot about what's going to make us happy. We've been wrong about the world a lot. We've been wrong about ourselves a lot. And it's like this radical willingness just to learn from all of that, to just like be open to not knowing, to treat the world as this kind of feedback loop, learning, learning, learning. And now there's some sense of like, okay, I'm actually have gotten a lot better at predicting what will actually make me happy. You know, what will actually make me happy? It's not the fever dream of craving, whatever. It's like very sober, you know, it never sounds kind of like some big idealized whatever, you know. It's just like, it sounds like Dharma, like, okay, if I do that, maybe like this, but yeah, it seems right, you know, if I go this way, right? And so, yeah, that's based a lot about self-knowledge and then about knowing dukkha, anicca, anatta, you know, like knowing that, no, understanding the nature of, you know, of dukkha, of change and, you know, unsatisfactoriness, understanding that, understanding we never arrive in an identity where we feel like totally at home and like a grown up or something. We know that wanting is always different from getting, you know, and so we're like just attuned to all of that, and we attune to our strengths and also our kind of limitations. You know, it's like a big piece is like, in me predicting my own happiness, I actually have to know what the limitations of my own heart are, what the limitations of my equanimity are, you know. Like, it's too easy to just overestimate that stuff, right, and be like, oh, I'll be fine. No, wait a second. You know, so I'm like informed by my own kind of power and goodness, but also my limits, you know, um, and that is a process of not preconceiving the ideas or something like that, of entering into a certain kind of not knowing and then harvesting data out of some of the stillness, silence, so that we can be clear, and we know that, we'll just have to keep learning too, you know, we'll just have to keep learning too. And maybe what masqueraded as kind of as like my deepest insight was just fear talking or something like that, you know. It's like, I don't know, but we stay open, we keep practicing. And yeah, anyway, that's so what's coming up. Yeah, does
Beautiful.
that speak to it? Yeah.
Very much so. Very much so. Thank you so much.
Okay, okay. All right, right. Thank you. Okay, folks, we'll pause here. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm in a slightly weird mood, I realize. Yeah, a little, just not like bad. Like, you didn't do anything wrong. No, no. It's just like, oh yeah, my mind is a little different this evening. Anyway, I appreciate, you being with me. And yeah, maybe I'll see some of you. How many people are going to the the retreat in San Diego? Okay, okay. Oh, sweet. Okay, great. I think there's still maybe a couple spots left. I'm not sure actually, but maybe I'll see some of you. And thank you. Thanks for donations and. Anything, Phil, that
Yes, on behalf of the whole group gathered here, thank you so much, Matthew, for, I guess there's a gentleness and a sweetness about your teaching that is especially striking. And I thank you for bringing that sort of energy to all of us tonight. And a tangible way of thanking Matthew, incidentally, is to go to his donation page and express generosity, which is the first of the 10 perfections. A very important one. We use this word dana, which means generosity, but I think I wanted to use the English translation. Generosity is a gift. And Dharma teachers don't charge for their teaching. They all support for their teaching comes from individual donors. So at the bottom of the scroll of the page, the chat page, or close to the bottom, Irene has put Matthew's page on there where you can go directly there and make a donation. So again, thank you so very much, Matt.
Thanks. That was lovely. Thank you, Phil. Okay. Good night, most of you. Yeah. Bedtime sometime. Yeah. All right. Hope to see you somewhere on the Zoom campus or at the mission in San Diego.